1 Samuel chapter 20, the fear of the Lord or lack thereof. Part of what we're going to discuss tonight is about understanding what's in people's hearts, understanding motives, and trying to perceive something that's invisible. And this is what people say all the time. They say, you can't know my heart, only God knows my heart. And they try to claim this as a form of innocence, but when you have the fear of the Lord, it changes you. When you have the fear of the Lord, it comes out. And when you don't have the fear of the Lord, there's very clear markers. I titled this because what we're going to see is people's actions showing us who they are on the inside. We have three key players. We have Jonathan, David, and Saul. And 2 out of the 3 have the fear of the Lord. Anybody want to take a guess? David has the fear of the Lord. Jonathan has the fear of the Lord. And Saul is the lack of. He is an angry man. And we're going to see that. Let's read verses 1 through 4. Then David fled from Naioth in Ramah and came and said before Jonathan, "What have I done? What is my guilt? And what is my sin before your father, that he seeks my life?" And he said to him, "Far from it. You shall not die. Behold, my father does nothing either great or small without disclosing it to me. And why should my father hide this from me? It's not so." But David vowed again, saying, "Your father knows well that I have found favor in your eyes." And he thinks, "Don't tell David, for he knows this, lest he be grieved. But truly, as the Lord lives and as your soul lives, there is but a step between me and death." Then Jonathan said to David, "Whatever you say, I will do for you." Who can catch me up where we've been? What happened in chapter 19? So David flees because Saul is seeking to kill him. He tried to spear him. David's like, "Not doing this again. This is round 2. No thanks." He leaves to go home. His wife hears the rumor because these men are like, "We're going to get David," and they're just being loud and boisterous, as we read in the Psalm. And so she warns him, "Flee for your life. You got to go and escape." So he flees to Ramah, particularly to a person. Anybody remember who? He flees to Samuel, who is the prophet of God, and he is also a friend of David. David flees to him, tells him what's happening with Saul, and then some funny things happen. Saul finds out he's there and sends some men up there. He sends them 3 times, and what happens? They ended up prophesying and being filled with the Spirit and worshiping God and forgetting their whole purpose of going. They forgot that they were soldiers, and they turned into worshipers. And then Saul gets fed up, and he goes up there. And what happens to Saul? He gets naked, or as Pastor Steve would say, he gets naked. So he's in his skivvies, as we talked about. He's in his underwear, and he's preaching, or he's having some ecstatic experience, or something's taking place. And he forgets who he is. He forgets that he's not a king, he's a worshiper. And in that moment of scurry, in that moment of confusion, David flees. He's like, "Oh, Saul's men are here? I should probably go." Saul's right behind him. So when Saul shows up, David's already gone. I'm assuming that Samuel had left as well, because it said from that point forward, back in chapter 18, I believe it is, that Samuel never saw Saul again. He was never face to face with Saul again until Samuel dies. Now we pick up in verse 1, David fled from Naioth and Ramah. The storyline connects right there. He fled from Ramah, and he came to Jonathan. And he says to Jonathan, "Your dad's out to get me." What's Jonathan's response? "Nah, get out of here. My dad's not out to get you. What's the proof of this? If he wanted to get you, he would tell me. I'm his trusted son. I'm his trusted advisor. I'm the man. And I haven't heard anything about this." Now, to be fair, David, I told you last time my dad was out to get you, but I talked him out of it. We're good. Remember that open conspiracy? We're good. He swore an oath. He said, "As the Lord lives, I'm not going to kill David. David's great. I like David." Jonathan has this idea that his dad is being faithful to his word. And what's David's response? This is what he says. Verse 3, David vowed again. David's like, no. As the Lord lives, he's out to get me. And literally, I will die tonight. That's how serious this is. There is but a step between me and death. Verse 3. And then they have a whole conversation moving forward about Jonathan saying, "What do you want me to do?" So this introduction, David does what he does best. He has a pattern. What's his pattern? He finds a good friend. in a time of need. These are friends who were born in prosperity, who are there for bad times. Good friends for bad times. He goes to Samuel, then he goes to Jonathan. David confesses his innocence. David is open in declaring, what have I done? What is my sin? I don't understand why this is happening, because I'm being sought after and I'm innocent. I am pure of heart. Test me, try me, know me, declare to me my sin. What have I done? In Psalm 26, it's believed, we don't know, it doesn't say in the scriptures, but it's believed that Psalm 26 was written by David in this moment, at this time. He's going to be waiting 2 days to talk to Jonathan. So while he's waiting, it's believed that he wrote Psalm 26. And so he says very much that. He says, God, I'm innocent. You know me. I fear you. I trust you. Test me. Try me. Show me my sin, but deliver me from my enemies, and I will dwell with you. Now, we talked about Jonathan's trusted status. Verse 4, why is Jonathan so willing to help David? Well, he says in verse 4, Jonathan said to David, whatever you say, I will do for you. Whatever you want to do to resolve this, I'm at your command. If we remember back to chapter 18, as soon as he had finished speaking to Saul, the soul of Jonathan was knit to the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as his own soul. And Saul took him that day and would not let him return to his father's house. Then Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as his own soul. He made a covenant, and then he gave him his robe, he gave him his armor, and he gave him his weapons, his bow, and he said, David, here I am, I'm at your beck and call. Jonathan swore an oath. He made a contract with David on that day that said, I will defend you, and I will protect you, and I will be your friend. He is holding up his end of the contract. The accusation is brought against his father, and he has to make a choice. Obey the king, who is my father, or defend my friend, who is a soldier. And he chooses his friend because he swore an oath to that person. This is the covenant of friendship. And then it's going to be ratified, and we're going to get a new covenant installed here, and it's going to be very special. But that's the motive behind Jonathan. Yes, it's a motivation out of love, but it's also a motivation out of commitment. He made a previous commitment to follow David, to be David's friend, and now because the times have gotten tough, doesn't mean he can cut and run. It doesn't mean that he can pick alliances over his father or David and have to choose. He has already decided that he will follow David. Therefore, when the moment arose, he said, whatever you need, I'm on your side. That's a type of friendship that takes commitment in good seasons to outlast bad seasons. Because life is hard, and seasons of despair and destruction will happen to all of us. And it's the real friend who is born under adversity who will be by you. Verse 5 through 23. We're going to do a little bit of reading here. What we're going to do, though, we're going to skip verses 12 through 17. We're going to read them, but we're going to come back and discuss them later. So we're going to follow the narrative and follow the story, and then come back and discuss a part of it. Verse 5 says, So David said to Jonathan, Behold, tomorrow is the new moon, and I should not fail to sit at the table with the king. But let me go that I may hide myself in the field till the third day at evening. If your father misses me at all, then say, David earnestly asked leave of me to return to Bethlehem, his city, for there is a yearly sacrifice there for all the clan. If he says, Good, it will be well with your servant. But if he is angry, then know that harm is determined by him. Therefore deal kindly with your servant, for you have brought your servant into a covenant of the Lord with you. But if there is guilt in me, kill me yourself. For why should you bring me to your father? And Jonathan said, Far be it from you. If I knew that it was determined by my father that harm should come to you, would I not tell you? Then David said to Jonathan, Who will tell me if your father answers you roughly? And Jonathan said to David, Come, let us go out into the field. So they both went out into the field. And Jonathan said to David, The Lord, the God of Israel, be witness. When I have sounded out my father about this time tomorrow or the third day, behold, if he is well disposed towards David, shall I not then send and disclose it to you? Should it please my father to do you harm, the Lord do so to Jonathan, and more also if I do not disclose it to you, and send you away that you may go into a safe place. May the Lord be with you, as he has been with my father. If I am still alive, show me the steadfast love of the Lord, that I may not die, and do not cut off your steadfast love from my house forever. When the Lord cut off every one of the enemies of David from the face of the earth, and Jonathan made a covenant with the house of David, saying, May the Lord take vengeance on David's enemies. And Jonathan made David swear again by his love for him, for he loved him as he loved his own soul. Then Jonathan said to him, Tomorrow is the new moon, and you will be missed, because your seat will be empty. On the third day go down quickly to the place where you hid yourself when the matter was in hand, and remain beside the stone heap. And I will shoot 3 arrows to the side of it, as though I shot at a mark. And behold, I will send the boy, saying, Go, find the arrows. If I say to the boy, Look, the arrows are on this side of you, take them. Then you are to come, as the Lord lives, it is safe for you, and there is no danger. But if I say to the youth, Look, the arrows are beyond you, then go, for the Lord has sent you away. And as for the matter of which you and I have spoken, behold, the Lord is between you and me forever. So verses 5 through 23, you have a plan that is being hatched. What is this plan? So he says, I'm in danger. And he's like, no, you're not. And he's like, I really am. Okay, what's the plan? So they're going to test to determine if Saul is actually after David. How are they going to test this? So they're going to use the circumstances of the season and of the times. So they're being wise on where they are, and they're using the tools that they have. So the new moon is a feast in the Bible where they celebrate at the end of the season. God has given them rain, God has given them food, and they celebrate and they give thanks to the Lord, and they have this festal gathering. This festal gathering, being biblical, has turned into a tradition. And this is generally what happens is God said, hey, in this season and at this time, do this thing, but do it in a very specific way. Now, they do the thing, the new moon festival, but they don't do it in the specific way that God told them to do it. It kind of turned into every clan and every family doing their own thing. It'd be very much like, hey, celebrate the birth of my son by giving thanks for the good gift that God has given. And then we turn around and be like, God gave good gifts, so let's just give gifts. And we call it Christmas, and then call it Xmas, and then call it, Mass without Christ, and then just get rid of the whole thing and say, can't we just celebrate without him? We take a thing that is good, a celebration that is good, and we just twist it over the years to turn it into a tradition. And that's what this is. It's a tradition that the whole culture is doing. No one's exempt from it, but to be sitting at the table with the king is a place of honor. The king would have his family there. That's why Jonathan's going to be there. And we'll find out that Abner, I think Abner is his uncle. He's going to be there, but he's also a commander of the army. But David is going to have the excuse of going home to be with his family. It's very much like having a boss, and there's a dinner party or a Christmas party, and your boss has invited you over. And then you're like, thanks, I appreciate that, but my family celebrates Christmas every year, and I have to fly home. So thanks, but no thanks. If they are happy for you, then you know that they're on your side. If they're not happy for you, then you know your boss doesn't like you. And you're like, whoops, must have done something. So that's the general idea. Now, they are using general psychology. They're saying, hey, how can we know the motives of somebody's heart? Well, we have to watch and see what they do. The Bible calls this fruit. People who bear good fruit have good things in their heart. People who bear bad fruit have evil things in their heart. This is what Jesus says. Out of the heart comes adultery and evil and murder and slander and all this different. It all starts in the heart. And so people's reactions matter. If you watch and you pay attention to how people react, it tells you a lot about them. And then watching and paying attention pays dividends. If you watch your coworkers and you see how they all interact together, you'll see what's in their hearts. You'll see that this person doesn't like that person. Why? Because that person's always talking trash about that person. But to their face, they're very friendly. So what does that tell you about that person? They're fake. They're not genuine. They're not very good people to hang out with, because you know what's going to end up happening? You're going to be on the receiving end of that. All you have to do is offend them once and turn around, they're going to be talking trash. The goal is to understand people around you. If we've learned anything so far, it's that good friends are hard to find, and everybody needs a good friend, and everybody should be a good friend. That's what we found with King David and Jonathan. Pastor Ben, I really like his stories because he'll say that he's oblivious to people's motives, that people with evil intent kind of slip through his net. So God gave him his wife, and she can see it. Now, to be fair, women tend to see things that men don't see. Women tend to have a ingenuity to be like, hey, don't trust that person, or that person's up to no good, or that person's two-faced. Where men are just like, we're just like good buddies, I guess. We all need to be shrewd, and we need to be wise. David figured it out. How did David figure out that the king wanted to kill him? His wife, he threw a spear at him. Jonathan, people told him, because he tried to do it 3 times. Now that's David's patience, that's David's humility, his submission. He submits to authority. That's why God exalted him to be the highest authority in the land. It's because he submits to authority. But it's loud and clear to David, this is the reality. I can see it, and I know it is fact. Okay, prove it. Prove it. That is always the test of our day. We need to know who is on our side, who is for us, and who is not. Because the enemy is out to get us. Plenty of people are not on your side, and nobody's going to help you. And when the day comes and you need a Jonathan, you might not have a Jonathan. So it's good to know who are real good friends, genuine people. Verses 24 through 34, we're going to see Jonathan's patience and Saul's lack of patience. So the scene is that we have 3 days. We have 3 days to figure out if Saul is out to kill David. Verse 24. So David hid himself in the field, and when the new moon came, the king sat down to eat food, and the king sat on his seat, as at other times, on the seat by the wall. Jonathan sat opposite, and Abner sat by Saul's side. But David's place was empty. Yet Saul did not say anything that day, for he thought, something has happened to him. He is not clean. Surely he is not clean. But on the second day, the day after the new moon, David's place was empty. And Saul said to Jonathan his son, why has not the son of Jesse come to the meal, either yesterday or today? And Jonathan answered Saul, David earnestly asked leave of me to go to Bethlehem. He said, let me go, for our clan holds a sacrifice in the city, and my brother has commanded me to be there. So now, if I have found favor in your eyes, let me go away and see my brothers. For this reason, he has not come to the king's table. Then Saul's anger was kindled against Jonathan, and he said to him, you son of a perverse, rebellious woman, do I not know that you have chosen the son of Jesse to your own shame, and to the shame of your mother's nakedness? For as long as the son of Jesse lives on the earth, neither you nor your kingdom shall be established. Therefore send and bring him to me, for he shall surely die. Then Jonathan answered Saul his father, why should he be put to death? What has he done? But Saul hurled a spear at him to strike him. So Jonathan knew that his father was determined to put David to death. And Jonathan rose from the table in fierce anger and ate no food the second day of the month, for he was grieved for David, because his father had disgraced him, or humiliated him, or put him to shame. On day 1, there's peace, there's tranquility, everything seems okay. And this is how it works. When you're trying to understand people's motives, they don't want you to know. Everybody's playing poker, and they don't want to show their hand. So day 1, everything's great, and Saul keeps his mind and his wits about him. And what is Saul's thought? What does he say? Why is David not here? He's unclean. What does that mean? So this is religious terminology. Purity is everything, especially if you're very religious. Imagine that you were told as a child, dirt is bad, don't get dirty. You were always told your entire life, don't get dirty. And then you don't show up. And you know what people's first thoughts are? Must have gotten dirty. That's the idea, that his purity is gone. Now, lack of purity doesn't mean sin. A lack of purity just means not clean. So if you were handling a dead body, you're considered unclean. You're not doing an evil thing, you're burying a dead person. That's okay, it's a good thing. You can honor them, you can respect them, you can do what God calls you to do. But you are defiled, you're made dirty or unclean because of a situation that you're in. This could be dead animals or dead people. It could be having sexual intercourse. It can be lots of other scenarios. Sometimes it can be sin. Outright sin is defiling. The thing is that David is a soldier. Maybe David killed somebody in battle. He's been around dead bodies. He has to go through a cleansing ritual on day one. So he makes an excuse. But notice that he uses traditional religious concepts. This is Saul's false religion. He believes that he can follow God. He believes that he can follow the traditions of his culture, his people, and still plan to murder somebody who's innocent. And this is the height of ridiculousness. Day 2, the hurricane erupts. Saul sits down for the dinner and he sees David's spots empty and he asks a question. Where is he? And what's the answer? He went home for Christmas, man. It's no big deal. He went home because his brother was asking him. Now, is this a lie? I don't think so. I think that if this is a custom that they do all the time, then the brothers would have been like, yeah, come home for the holidays. Come home and hold the feast with us. There's an easy potentiality for that. It's easy to believe that David was called home. Is it a lie or is it a truth? It doesn't tell us. It just simply says, this is the plan, and they are following the plan. So he says, David's not here. He's not going to be here. And Saul's response says everything. This is the key to understanding motives. Anger is one of the biggest cues of somebody who is wrong. I remember when I was growing up in the Christian faith, I was born again, I was 21 years old, and then I was raised in the charismatic movement. This is the name it and claim it. This is, God's promises are your dreams come true. Here's a blank check. Do whatever you want. God's on your side, yada, yada, yada. It's a bunch of shenanigans. We would pray over a crippled person and we'd say, God's healed you in Jesus' name. Okay, get up and walk. And he's like, no, I'm still crippled. And it really bugged me that this would happen over and over again. And so the teacher who was teaching me said, that person was not healed because they didn't have enough faith. They didn't have enough faith for God to heal them. And so I was like, okay, faith is really important. I get it. Bible says it. I mean, he can show me scriptures where it says, with some faith, you can move mountains. So they obviously are not believing God. That's their fault. And then I read a scripture where it said, if you have the faith of a mustard seed, So I went up to my teacher and I was like, hey, I don't understand. You're saying that they don't have enough faith, but the Bible says it takes very little faith. So can you explain that? And he got really angry and he looked at me and he said, who told you that? And I was like, I was just reading my Bible. And he stormed off. And I was like, oh man, I need to actually study the Bible and learn it for myself. Because everything I've been told was a lie. And it all came out because of how somebody reacted to the truth. Jonathan challenged his father and he said, why? There is zero reason for you to kill David. And this dude loses it. First, he says, David should have been here. I'm angry and you are a son of a gun. He actually curses. He curses his wife, who is the mother of Jonathan. So we like to use the B word, you son of a B. It's generally what he's saying. You son of a perverse, rebellious woman. This guy is angry. And then this is what he says. You have chosen David to your own harm, and you will never have peace, or your kingdom will never have peace until he is dead. Then he picks up a spear and tries to kill his son. Saul can't stand reason, Saul knows that God's will is that David should be the king. Now, nobody in the kingdom knows this. Saul is the only one who knows that God has called David. And so he is in outright rebellion and war with God. And he promises his son, he says, if we can kill David, you will have a strong kingdom. And then he turns around to kill his son. Right? He tries to throw a spear at him. So how concerned is he about his son's kingdom? Not very much, because he just tried to kill his own kid. That is the idiocy of this hypocritical religion. Saul has gone from the heights of Everest down to the depths of hell, and he is fully given over to do evil at all cost. But notice, he still follows religious things. From the outward perspective, he still looks religious. So this is the fate of dead religion. A dead religion only creates hypocrisy. When your heart is false, when you are at war with God, you can have the appearance of religion, but you will lack its power and you will destroy people around you. This is where you get whole religions of extreme child abuse or extreme spousal abuse or greed or full-blown liars, people who mishandle the scriptures and write their own book and say, no, God didn't actually say. In fact, let's remove 80% of what the Bible says. It's all one big form of hypocrisy, because it's not true living religion, it's dead religion. Our founders, when they built the United States, specifically said ultimate power corrupts ultimately. So the idea is, if you have a dictator who has all power, they will be corrupted 100%. That's why we have the separation of our powers of judiciary. We have the legislative and executive. Verse 35, this is brothers in arms. In the morning, Jonathan went out into the field to the appointed time with David, and with him a little boy. And he said to his boy, run and find the arrows that I shoot. And as the boy ran, he shot an arrow beyond him. And when the boy came to the place of the arrow that Jonathan had shot, Jonathan called after the boy and said, is not the arrow beyond you? And Jonathan called after the boy, hurry, be quick, do not stay. So Jonathan's boy gathered up the arrows and came to his master. But the boy knew nothing. Only Jonathan and David knew the matter. And Jonathan gave his weapons to his boy and said to him, go and carry them to the city. And as soon as the boy had gone, David rose from the heap stone and fell on his face to the ground and bowed 3 times. And they kissed one another and wept with one another, David weeping the most. Then Jonathan said to David, go in peace, because we have sworn both of us in the name of the Lord, saying, the Lord shall be between you and me, between my offspring and your offspring, forever. And he arose and departed, and Jonathan went into the city. There was the plan to find out if Saul is guilty of murder in his heart. They found the motivation. They know exactly what's taking place. Jonathan fulfills the vow to warn David through the scenes that they told us. So the plan is, I'm going to shoot some arrows, and then I'm going to send somebody to go get them. And if I tell them it's further, then you know that you need to leave. But if it's right there, then you can come and it's safe for you. They did this all in secret. Nobody knew about it. So it protected Jonathan. And then David could flee and nobody would know that they had this conversation. What's interesting is the amount of affection that takes place at this. If you put it in perspective of where they've been and where they're going, it doesn't seem like that big a deal. It's like, David, just go hide out for a little bit. Well, it'll be okay. But the reality that is setting in at this point is that these 2 men who have fought battles together and been in war together, have been united under covenant, have loved each other as their own souls, will never see each other again. The time has come that David knows his life is on the line. Jonathan can't be there to help David. David needs to flee, and Jonathan needs to be at his father's side, and he says, it's time to go. That's why they're so emotional at this point, because they are best friends who will never meet each other in this life ever again. David comes out and he pays homage. He's so grateful for his friend. He bows 3 times and he's giving God thanks. He's showing his respect and his honor and his admiration for Jonathan for being such a good friend. And then he comes over and he kisses him. Now, we hear kissing and we always think it's sexual, but it's just not the case. Culturally, we don't do it. As Americans, we don't kiss, but there's other cultures that kiss. So like in Hawaii, the ancient culture, you'd breathe each other's breath. So you'd walk over and you'd be like, ah, and then you'd be like, on a side note, the reason why white people are called haoles or haoles is it means that they have no breath. Because when they greeted, they didn't greet the way that the Hawaiians greeted. We shake hands. We are people who shake hands. And so that cultural difference made them stand out. But every culture has some form of affection. Kissing is in every culture for husband and wife. You can't get around that. So they're hugging on each other, they're kissing on each other, and they know that this is the beginning of the end. This is a life shift for both of them, and that they will be friends forever, but never see each other again. Jonathan's going to go die in war, and David will rise to power. Jonathan's going to die with his father. That's the emotion behind this, that they're brothers in arms, they're warriors, they're best friends, they're family. Imagine your sibling or your mom, like looking at your mom in the face and like, I love you, but somebody's out to kill me. I gotta go. And you know you'll never see them again, ever. It's an emotional moment. Let's go back to verse 11 through 17. What we ended at with verse 42, Jonathan says to David, the Lord shall be between me and you, and between my offspring and your offspring forever. That's the last words he said. God is witness to the promise that we made to each other. We're blood brothers. Go in peace, because we have sworn, both of us, in the name of the Lord. The Lord shall be between you and me. So we're going to read what he's talking about there. This comes up in chapter 20, verse 11 through 17, where Jonathan has already made a covenant to be on David's side. Jonathan has already said, I will defend you, I'll take care of you, I'll bless you, and I'll be your right-hand man. But this covenant is going to go deeper. This covenant is going to get more serious. So let's read it in verse 11. And Jonathan said to David, come, let us go out into the field. So they both went out into the field. And Jonathan said to David, the Lord, the God of Israel, be witness. When I have sounded out my father about this time tomorrow or the 3rd day, behold, if he is well disposed towards David, shall I not then send and disclose it to you? But should it please my father to do you harm, the Lord do so to Jonathan, and more also, if I do not disclose it to you and send you away, that you may go in safety. Now that's the first covenant. The first covenant they made was one of protection. I got your back, is what he says. Now he says right here, may the Lord be with you as he has been with my father. If I am still alive, show me the steadfast love of the Lord, that I may not die. And do not cut off your steadfast love from my house forever. When the Lord cuts off every one of the enemies of David from the face of the earth. And Jonathan made a covenant with the house of David, saying, may the Lord take vengeance on David's enemies. And Jonathan made David swear again by his love for him, for he loved him as his own soul. So now this covenant is one of familial affection. This is my family bound to your family. When all of your enemies die, now who's his enemy? Saul. All of your enemies are cut off. Don't cut my family off. When God avenges you, remember, I'm your friend. And be kind and merciful to my family. Right? This is a generational blessing. And he's saying, let's covenant together, swear to me that you will protect my family. Now, why is that significant? God is witness in the scene that's being played out right here. What ends up happening, if I'm the king, I die, who becomes the king? My children. So if I am not a part of the royal family and want to be the king, what do I have to destroy? The whole royal family. Because if one child survives, they are the heir to the throne. So Jonathan is saying this: I know you're going to be the king. I know this will be your kingdom. But when you reign, remember my family. Don't cut them off, but bless them. And Jonathan makes him swear an oath. He's emphatic about it, that you are to show mercy to my family. Now, the flip side of that is God will avenge your enemies. So if they are against you, I understand. So who does Jonathan pick between his family and David? He leaves behind his natural relation for a supernatural relation. And he chooses a narrow path that seems unlikely. It seems impossible that David would be the king when the current king has put a bounty on his head. But Jonathan knows that God is with him because these men fear the Lord. They know the God of Israel and they know God's will. Jonathan knows God's will when nobody else does, except his father, who just rejects God's will. So why does he say, let's go out into the field? In verse 11, they're talking. It doesn't say where they're talking. It just says that Jonathan came from Ramah to Naioth, and he's talking to Jonathan. Jonathan says in verse 11, he says to David, come, let us go out into the field. So they both went out into the field. So there's this interesting thing that happens in the Old Testament that is brought into the New Testament to explain covenants. It says that animals are sacrificed for the covenant as a guarantee on each side, that as this blood was shed, if you break this covenant, your blood is shed. We see this over and over again. Where did Jesus ratify the new covenant? In the city or outside the city? It was outside the city because in the Old Testament, the sacrifice for sin was taken outside the city and burned into ash. And so we have this illusion of going outside to ratify a covenant. So where there was the first covenant, then comes the second covenant. Right? So let's read Hebrews 13:11. So the sequence for the sacrifice of sin is that you bring a living animal to the tent of meeting or to the temple. So you would take a living animal into the altar, then you'd slit its throat, bleed it out, cut it up into pieces, and roast it. But what would end up happening for a sacrifice for sin is they would take the blood and they'd sprinkle it on the altar, and then they would take the animal outside of the city, as in removing the sin outside the city, and then burn it to ash. And this is what it says in verse 11. For the bodies of those animals whose blood is brought into the holy places by the high priest as a sacrifice for sin are burned outside the camp. So Jesus also suffered outside the gate in order to sanctify the people through his own blood. Therefore, let us go to him outside the camp and bear the reproach he endured. For here we have no lasting city, but we seek the city that is to come. That is to say, here we don't have a kingdom yet. We are waiting for a new kingdom to come. So that this relationship between David, Saul, and Jonathan, Jesus, who is the king, yet not currently ruling over the planet, what we find out is that he had an enemy who is out to kill him, who sought his life. And Jesus went outside and suffered for our sins at the hands of his persecutors. David fled for his life at the hand of his persecutor, Saul. And then you get Jonathan. Jonathan is the faithful follower who follows David at all costs, and even at the persecution of his own father. His father turned the spear against him. And so you have a picture, a shadow, a type of Jesus. David is a type of Jesus. Saul is a type of the devil, an enemy, or the Pharisees. And Jonathan is a type of follower or believer or somebody who receives the blessing of the covenant. David is the promiser who promises to take care of his family, and Jonathan is the promisee, the one who receives the promise. Just like us, Jesus is the promiser, and we are the promisee. We receive the benefits of the new covenant. David is Jesus the king, the covenant keeper, and Saul is a Pharisee. He's a false ruler, and he's forsaken of God. It's the hypocrites of Jesus' day. It's a perfect picture of Saul. And then you got Jonathan, who suffers for his allegiance to the future king. Now, David is the promised king. God's anointed him, the anointed one of God. All we are waiting for is for him to take power over the kingdom. Jonathan knows that the kingdom is coming. Jonathan believes that David will rule and reign on the throne, even over his father, and he hopes and waits for that day. And he's given a guarantee. He's given a covenant that promises that when that day arrives, it'll be a blessing to him and not a curse. Now, to the Pharisees, on the other hand, that is 100% curse. To Saul, it is 100% curse. So let's talk about types and shadows. So my hand, this is my literal hand. If I shine a light and there's a shadow on the wall, is that shadow my hand? No. It's a representation of the physical. So when we talk about Jesus, what you have in the Old Testament, it's a shadow. It looks like Jesus. It acts like Jesus, but it's only a picture of the reality. That shadow is not my hand, but it has every marker and indication of my hand. If I was missing a finger, that shadow would be missing a finger. So when we're reading the Old Testament, it's a shadow on the wall. We're trying to understand what that shadow is telling us. And then we get to the New Testament and we're like, oh, dude, it's a hand. I get it. It's all about Jesus. So there's types and shadows. David is a type of Christ. He is a type of a Savior. Jesus is our Savior who dies for us, who's a king. David sacrifices his family, leaves and has nothing, and he will one day rule on his throne. He loses everything. Types and shadows. Come back next week for chapter 21. It's very insightful. It's a very good phase of David's life where he is humbled, he is crushed, he is persecuted, he is pressed, but he is not abandoned. So come back next week for 1 Samuel chapter 21. Smash that like button.